Welcome to part 2 of episode 27. Going over the NBA offseason. Jordan and we got Marcellus and Selene here. Don't need to reintroduce ourselves. We just did that. So let's hop right back into the first question for the Western Conference now. So the tiers that you have as far as championship contenders at the top in the West, I feel like it's pretty much just running back. Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, Jazz, Blazers. I really like what the Blazers did this offseason. I think they added a lot of depth, especially in the front court, and then also in the backcourt as far as guards that can come off the bench and contribute. And the Lakers and Clippers, with all that star power, the Clippers will figure it out. I didn't like their offseason, but I think they can figure it out. There's just too much talent there. Nuggets, another year, just deeper. They lose the two front court guys, but I think they'll manage with the two young guys they have in Michael Porter Jr. and our guy Bol. So Jordan, what you got for that one?
Yeah, so again, I kind of broke it down with just a couple of contender tiers. So I've got 3 teams in the West that I think can legitimately win the whole enchilada this year, and then I've got like a top 6 that are going to I think are in play for the conference finals, and we'll obviously get to skip that play-in round. I'll start at the top with the Lakers. We said we're not going to talk about them later on for best offseason, so I'm just going to touch on it here briefly. Have you ever there hasn't really been a champion that's had a better offseason than what the Lakers just did. Being able to add Marc Gasol and Montrezl Harrell, taking 6th man of the year candidate away from your town rivals. They also made the deal for Dennis Schroeder that's kind of now forgotten about for what was it, like the 28th pick in a very weak draft, and picking up Wes Matthews. And honestly, locking up LeBron, which getting him for a couple more years, best player in the game, and getting Anthony Davis to commit to 5 full years there was a pretty big deal too. He said a lot of that came from some of his worries about his injury history and stuff. And he wanted to make sure he secured the bag. But, the Lakers just did a really good job. And to me, they are overwhelming favorites when you run back what they did last year and you have the best player in the game right now in LeBron. Excited for the season, but I think the Lakers are overwhelming favorites. Do have the Clippers up there with them. I think they maybe are able to figure it out a little bit more with a little shakeup, getting new blood in their coaching, getting Doc Rivers out of there. Maybe this is the year that Paul George finally, kind of takes that step and grows up and matures. I don't know, that whole locker room kind of needed a reboot. So they did move some guys around, and they're always going to have a high ceiling just when you're able to put, 2 top 15 talents in the NBA on the same team. Little bit of a homer here, but I'm pretty big on the Jazz. I think they have an outside chance at a title this year, as good as they've had in years past. I'll go delve into some of the details a little bit later. But I liked what they did in the offseason. This was a team that, again, was a Mike Conley 3 from rimming out there at the end from taking out Denver, who's everybody's darling since they made the Western Conference Finals. And the Jazz, were a Mike Conley 3 away from winning it in Game 7, and a very silly 8-second backcourt violation on Donovan Mitchell in the last minute of Game 1 away from potentially sweeping that series. So I think people are really sleeping on what the Jazz have done in the last few years. And the ceiling for what they can do this year, especially, getting Bojan back healthy. I've still got Denver sticking around, though. I think they're going to take a step back, but they're definitely a strong team that I think will be a contender for the conference finals. And I'm going to throw Portland and Dallas in there as well. Big fans of what they've done in the offseason. And I just think Luka is a meteoric talent, once in a generation type of guy that really blew up last year and was in the conversation for most improved player. And you wonder how much further there is to go up. I don't know that he would be in most improved player again this year, because he would probably be putting up 35, 12, and 12 stat lines for that to be the case. Yeah. But I think Luka's got,
sounds about right.
Luka's got another gear. And I think the Mavericks with Carlisle, again, one of the most underappreciated and best coaches in the game. I think they're primed to make some noise in the West here.
Marcellus, what you got?
I've got Lakers, Golden State, Clippers, Nuggets, and Portland. I feel like each of those 5 squads are all contenders. We saw what Portland can do just watching them in the bubble and how they can kind of just ride Dame Lillard to wins. of course, we know what the Lakers are. They're looking like the 97 Bulls. I mean, the fact that they brought, the majority of their guys that they really needed to bring back, in addition to, getting two 6 Men of the Year candidates, I mean, just made them look like, I mean, they're the best team on paper that we've seen probably since the end of that Golden State dynasty. So, the Nuggets, I feel like the Nuggets, I mean, obviously just got better themselves. In addition to adding another year of Bol, another year of Michael Porter Jr., I feel like they are, definitely a contender. And I feel like the Clippers are going to figure it out. I would have liked to see them get a point guard. But at the same time, I feel like they still have Paul George. And I understand a lot of people are looking at the way that he's performed in the playoffs. But I think that we all see the talent is there and we see the type of player that he can be. So I think that eventually they'll figure it out, with Kawhi. And Golden State, I feel like Golden State had the best offseason of the West. And I'll get into that more later, but those are my five.
Got you. Yeah, led by the second best player of all time. The Lakers look pretty good this year. So Lenny, what you got?
So for me, I only have for true contenders, I only have three teams at that top level for me from the West. Obviously, the Lakers. I mean, the rich just got richer. Getting Montrezl Harrell to take that mid-level exception, like, was a finesse for the ages. Re-signing AD and Bron, all big moves. The Clippers, I know you're not that big on their offseason, but I do like some of their moves. I think that swapping out Montrezl Harrell for Serge Ibaka, he's a big who can actually play in games, like, down the stretch. And I think Luke Kennard is, like, a really interesting flyer. If he can stay healthy, I think that him and Lou Williams can really lead that second unit to a lot of points. They're going to give up a lot of points, but they're going to score a lot too. So watch out for them. And then my third actual contender from the West is Portland, man. Like, what an offseason. Talk about finesses, getting Robert Covington. I like the signing with Derek Jones Jr. as long as he can develop a little bit. Cantor to replace Whiteside is not bad. And a nice flyer on Harry Giles. Like, oh, and they get Rodney Hood back. Like, I think that they're a legit contender. They might be able to do something.
Rodney Hood for $20 million. I don't know.
I mean, he's there.
Team
we'll
option.
We can get to the contract and rip that later. But for right now, he's there this year. I think that they got a shot.
I got you. Just not a big Rodney Hood fan anymore. All right, so let's talk about the team's GM that you feel like had the best offseason, kind of speaking of that. So for me, it's pretty easily in this conference. I mean, outside of the Lakers, the New Orleans Pelicans. I really like the depth. At point guard, they can run out Lonzo Ball, Eric Bledsoe, and they also drafted Kira Lewis Jr., who I really like, at the guard spots. They also have JJ Redick as a shooter on the wing, in addition to Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Josh Hart. And then obviously Brandon Ingram, Wenyen Gabriel to come and play some spot minutes, hit some threes. From the perimeter, and then obviously Zion. I'm pretty high on Zion and the Steven Adams combo. I think defensively, it's going to be really hard to score on those two. They're both very mobile, both very switchable bigs. They both play really hard, really good teammates, both of them. And then you have Jackson Hayes backing those two up. In addition to Hernan Gomez and one of my sleepers, I really like Najee Marshall. I think he's going to earn some playing time. Maybe not toward the end of this year, but maybe next year, just as a wing defender that just locks up. There's enough scoring around him to make that happen. So, Jordan, who you got?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm just a homer, but I feel like I have to stand for my team since nobody else wants to mention them. I like what the Utah Jazz did. Maybe as a fan of them, I understand, more intimately some of the difficulties of competing in a small market. But they kind of just decided to roughly bring back what had worked for them last season. And then they went back to the well with Derek Favors after his 1-year sabbatical to New Orleans. I think when you look at what the Jazz did, they're able to combine the best of both worlds in terms of what has made them elite defensively and offensively in stretches over the past few years. Derek Favors in New Orleans. You talk about Zion and Steven Adams possibly being a nice pairing down low. Plus minus numbers defensively. The Pelicans gave up 6 fewer points per 100 possessions when Derek Favors was on the floor versus off last year. So I'm still not really sure why they didn't have any interest in bringing him back. I know he looked a little bit off offensively and wasn't really bringing too much there, but he's proven fit in the Utah system. And the Jazz biggest deficiency this past season was obviously the minutes at backup center. I do think it's a little rich to throw most of your mid-level. I think it was 3 and 27 was the contract for Favors. To throw that at him to mostly back up Rudy, but I still think he'll find his way to 20 to 24 minutes a game. He may get a little run, at the 4 when they play a bigger team like the Lakers, get some spot minutes starting there. But I do think Favors is a decent deal for that amount. They brought back Jordan Clarkson, who I think has been allowed to flourish now that he's been exposed to what a winning environment feels like. I mean, he was in Mizzou in college with the Lakers before LeBron really got there and took over. And then he was with the Cavaliers. So like this man hasn't known what it's like to win since high school, basically. So he's kind of taken off for the Jazz. Some of his defensive shortcomings are just kind of masked by playing on the floor with Rudy and some of the other defenders there. For 52, for $13 million a year to get a guy who's legitimately in 6 man of the year arguments. He didn't quite, make the top 3 on the ballot last year, but he was right there with what he did with the Jazz once they traded for him. And, how many guys for $13 million a year are you getting that can, come up consistently, lead a second unit and pop off for, 20 points a night fairly regularly? I don't think the answer is that many. So I like what the Jazz did there to, bring back Favors to anchor the defense, kind of stick with some of the things that made them great offensively last year. And the other thing is they kind of knew what was going to work for them. They didn't, step outside into the unknown. It's a tough sell to get a lot of these guys to come play basketball in Utah. They tried it last year with Jeff Green and Ed Davis. In the moment, I was a fan of those deals. The prices were bargains. I think they were, good deals for the price, but it just didn't work out. And not every player, not every player, not every team is meant to be a match. Even though, the Jazz seem to have pretty good culture with most of their players. Most of their players, leave and go somewhere else and don't do as well. But again, I think just when you think about how close they really were last year and how tight they played Denver without Bojan Bogdanovic, who's going to be back this year. I think this is a team that once you put Rudy and Derek Favors back is easily back up into the top 10 defensively. They had slipped to, I think it was 11th last year without Derek, but I expect them to get back up in the top 5. And I believe it was somewhere around Christmas or mid-December on last year. Everyone was all over the Mavericks, which for the whole season, they were head and shoulders the best offense in the league. But the Jazz, I think it was December 15th on last year, had the best number 1 offensive efficiency in the league. And even a couple of years ago when they lost to the Rockets in the first round of the playoffs, they just shot abysmally from 3. But according to advanced metrics, the quality of shots they were getting was just second to none. They were getting the best quality shots of any team in that scenario, and they just happened to not hit them. So what did they do last year? They bolstered their 3-point shooting and led the league in shooting threes. So I think this is a team that can do it in a lot of different ways. Really excited to see this season for them because I think they stuck to what they knew would work for them. And they have a little flexibility with Mike Conley having 1 year left on his contract to maybe look for some in-season upgrades with some of the pieces like Royce O'Neal or Georges Niang that, maybe they could ship out. They still have most of their draft picks. So I do think they're in a position to possibly make a deadline deal if needed.
I think for them, it's going to be important for either Royce O'Neal or Rudy Gobert to take a step forward offensively when they go through the scoring droughts. I mean, that was made worse by the fact that, like you said, Bojan was out. I mean, and we just got to pour one out. You're losing your boy Tony Bradley. Tough scene for Jordan. Yeah, big loss. Marcellus, what you got for that one?
I got Golden State having the best offseason. I feel like that number 2 pick was a big pick. There was a lot of different ways that they could have went with it, and I think they made the best decision. I think that them having a rim protector, I think that does a lot for their defense. When they had JaVale McGee as a rim protector, they had a decent defense. When KD got there that first year, I think he was one of the top 5 leaders on blocks for the NBA. That was one of their. I think that might have been their actual best defensive years. So yeah, I feel that the fact that they're going to have Whiteside there, he's going to be an elite rim protector from day one. I think that that's going to do a lot for their defense, and it's going to kind of, help some of their shortcomings, even though the fact that they got Kelly Oubre, it helps a lot too. The fact they've got Andrew Wiggins that's now going to be able to play the three and kind of, not be asked to score. He's going to actually be their third option. I think that's going to be big for them. And I just feel like they're going to be one of the better teams in the West just because of the fact that, they got Wiseman and they got Kelly Oubre.
Yeah, I like some of the other stuff they did around the margins, like they brought in Kent Bazemore, and then they drafted Nico Mannion, who I think can do a decent job of running the second unit. And then one of me and Jordan's sleepers is Caleb Wesson, bringing in, sharpshooting big guy. I think he could end up being something solid too. I don't know if you mentioned they also signed Brad Wanamaker, which isn't, a huge thing, but I think for their second unit, good defender, good vet, plays really hard. So Lenny, what you got?
So, I already touched on the Blazers earlier. So for this one, I'm going to go with the homer pick. I'm going to mention my Mavericks, man. Just like when we pull up at the bar, man, does somebody order wings? Because that's what we needed, and that's exactly what we got. We got, we lost Seth Curry, which, losing his crazy efficiency, shooting threes, that does hurt a little bit. But we did get Josh Richardson back, who can make up some of that, but also gives us what, someone like Curry never could, and that's elite perimeter defense. We also drafted Josh Green, which as long as he can shoot, he'll be pretty good. We got a nice developmental prospect and Tyler Bay, who was one of the best perimeter defenders in the draft. They just need to teach him how to shoot a ball, and then we got something there. We also got a nice little flyer on a minimum deal in Wes Iwundu. It was a nice little 3-and-D guy that earned surprising minutes for the Magic and their solid defensive rotation last year. And then we also got the MMA undefeated dude, James Johnson, out there for next time when Marcus Smart wants to try to get, not Marcus Smart, when
Marcus Morris.
What's his name? Marcus Morris. Yeah, when he wants to get smart with Luka, we got someone who can let him know what's really good. You know what I mean? But and then also the most subtle thing that we did, I think, in addition to moving Seth Curry's modest contract at $8 million a year, we were also able to unload Delon Wright, who was never really going to play for us because he was too afraid to shoot threes. So Rick Carlisle didn't like to play him much. But getting rid of his $9 million combined, we opened up an additional $17 million in cap space for next year. So we have got a max slot and then some. So Giannis, man, come on over.
He's still on.
Why? Abandoned ship. We got room.
You guys also
pull up, man.
Also got baby Seth Curry with Tyrell Terry too. That could end up being a good pick. All right, so a team that we think is positioning themselves for next year.
Yo, hold up. Sorry, we got to pause this. You skipped
So our other 4 or 5 playoff teams in the West. So I have the Warriors, the Mavericks, the Grizzlies, the Suns, and the Pelicans. The Grizzlies adding, a shooter in the draft to complement, another athlete. Not an athlete, the big from Michigan State. I'm blanking on his name. Oh man. But they got a big from Michigan State that can play well off the bench, rebounding, blocking shots.
Xavier Tillman.
That's the one. Yep. And the Suns, I'll let someone else take this because I know someone's talking about the Suns later. But bringing in CP3 changes the entire culture for that team and definitely placates their star Booker, who was rumored to be wanting out for a while. Pelicans I already talked about, and just echoing what Marcellus said with the Warriors, just kind of retooling, adding in shot blocking, rim running big. That fills a lot of needs that they had on the team and complements Draymond in a pretty good way. They'll manage without Clay. Figure it out. I thought Oubre was a really good pickup in the margins as well. So what you got, Jordan?
Yeah, I'm just going to hit you with, again, my top 10 in order. Top 6 that I had, again, they're the ones I think can make a run to the conference finals in the West. So I've got the Lakers, Clippers, Utah, Portland, Dallas, and Denver as my top 6 in order. So I do have Denver dropping a good little bit. And then I've got Phoenix, Houston, the Warriors, and the Pelicans for my 4 play-in teams in order. I guess I'm not quite as sold on Golden State as you guys are. I know last season was a very weird one for everybody, but especially the Warriors with Steph's injury early in the season. But even before that, they were, small sample size, but they were 1-2 and giving up God knows how many points a game. I think it was like over 120 a game. Again, it was very small sample in like 3.5 games. And then once Steph got injured, they went into tank mode. But I'm just not convinced that this Warriors team has enough defensive chops. Like, where are they getting it from unless James Wiseman just comes in and is a world beater? I think Draymond is decent on his own, but I don't think he's the kind of guy that, is going to make everybody around him just that much better defensively just based on what he does. I think he's one of those glue guys that kind of fills in the gaps and can anticipate things and get steals and things like that. But yeah, I'm just not sure on the Warriors. They're a team I kind of struggled with. I do think they've got enough offensive talent here to get into the play-in round. But I did waffle with the idea of them maybe even falling further. Just again, based on what they did last season, and not having Clay this year, I think will be a major loss. And I will say, they're paying $169 million of luxury tax, being light years ahead. So they could get Kelly Oubre. Was that the big move? Because he cost like $65 million in luxury tax. So have fun with that first round exit. And near upwards of $250 million in luxury tax.
So Lenny, what you got?
I mean, it's a lot of the same. Like for the Western Conference, I think we do kind of know who that. We all know obviously the top tier, but then we also kind of know like what other teams are going to fall into that kind of the playoff spots. Like, I mean, other than like the Kings, like who else is a guaranteed going to miss? Like, I mean,
Thunder.
Minnesota, probably San Antonio. Like after that, like everybody else, because of the expanded playoffs, because of COVID, like, well, everybody else you're in. It's just a matter. It's going to be wild figuring out the seedings. And it's going to be I'm really going to be looking forward to watching that on League Pass. But, other than like those garbage teams, it's like we kind of know who the rest of them are.
Marcellus?
Yeah, I've got Houston staying solid in that kind of 6-10 range. I think that the Suns are going to jump in there. I guess they were in there last year technically as far as if the playoffs include 10 teams. So, especially with them adding Chris Paul and, a guy like Jay Crowder to their squad. I feel like that helps their team a lot. The Jazz are going to stay solid. I really like the Pelicans. I'm a big Zion fan. I feel like the sky's the limit. We saw how efficient he was last year. And I feel like he's only going to be in better shape this year. I'm also a big Lonzo Ball fan. And I think Brandon Ingram's a good player. So that's obviously an all-star. So I think that, they're obviously in that range. And I also think, obviously Luka's a superstar. I don't think that they're one of the top 5 teams in the West, but at the same time, I feel like, if he's hot and he's playing well, in addition to Porzingis, they could essentially be a championship contender. I think that he's that good of a player that he kind of wins them that many games down the stretch, or can win them that many games down the stretch. So those are my next 5 teams, I guess, that would fill out the playoffs.
And a lot of people were talking about the Houston Rockets like they absolutely have no talent on the roster. You still have John Wall, you still have James Harden, at least right now. Then you have Eric Gordon, Christian Wood, PJ Tucker, DeMarcus Cousins, projects, like Bruno Caboclo and Kenny Wooten that are pretty good defensively. Caboclo can score the ball a bit. Gerald Green, Sterling Brown. That's not a terrible roster. But I don't know if I'd go as high as 6, like you were saying. I think it's more towards the latter end of that at best. So, all right, let's move on to the next one. Just talking about the teams that we think are probably going to be in the lottery, positioning their teams for that. For me, it's the Kings, and I think it's less out of planning and more out of we just have no idea what we're doing. Tyrese Halliburton was a pretty popular, a lot of people that like that pick, getting him at 12. A lot of draft experts, quote unquote, had him in their top 5, top 8. They also signed Chimezie Mutu, which is just a solid around the margins, but bringing in Hassan Whiteside, Glenn Robinson, Robert Woodard, Frank Kaminsky, none of these moves you're writing home about. They let Harry Giles walk in free agency, and then they didn't get anything for Bojan Bogdanovic, and they also Bogdan. Oh my God, whatever. And Ken Bazemore. I'm not going to memorize Sacramento Kings names. I'm sorry.
We'll memorize their names when they sniff the playoffs. That's when we'll start focusing.
When they sniff getting out of the lottery, we can talk about that. That organization has a lot of issues. I'm not a huge fan of the coaching situation. I thought that the coach they had before that was doing a fine job. Before they let him go. Still like De'Aaron Fox. I don't understand what Buddy Hield's issue is. Why he's always upset about something, but
because he's in Sacramento.
Yeah, I'd be pretty pissed if I was on the Kings team too.
It's just a weird mix of talent, kind of similar to, I think it was what Jordan was saying for the Magic in the East. There's a lot of pieces that would be good in other situations, but altogether it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. So Jordan, what you got for this one?
Yeah, I'm going to hit this one quick like I did with the Cavs in the East. I mean, I think there's one clear contender, and I'll just touch on it briefly because I think Marcellus may touch on it a little bit more in depth. But the Thunder, I mean, you look at the moves they did this offseason. It's kind of amazing how getting Chris Paul vaulted them so high up the standings last year. And, obviously, letting him go and then, trading every other asset they could under the sun. I mean, I think they traded the office fax machine for a second-round pick. So, Sam Presti is just accumulating every single pick he can get his hands on. This Thunder team has some interesting, young parts. Lou Dort, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Be curious to see how long Al Horford is on the team. Selene wants me to mention George Hill and his great 3-point percentage. But
he led the league last year, man. You got to put some respect on him.
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, he's going to have to hit 100% of his threes this year if the Thunder want to sniff the 14th spot in the West. I mean, they're
but they're going to use him as a trade. But I bet you that they get at least 2 second-rounders for him, if not a lottery protected first. Somebody contending is going to trade that for him.
That's a lot.
I bet you a McChicken on it.
You must have several George Hill jerseys at the house. I don't understand why.
I mean, the guy led the league in 3-point shooting, man, in a league that's all about shooting, that can also play competent defense and handle the ball with the second. That's worth something. Y'all are acting like he's a bag of chips. Like, come on.
If he made his free throws in the finals, we would still think that J.R. Smith's the GOAT.
Wow.
Anyways.
That was a lot.
By weed, you mean Cavalier fans? Get out of here.
All right, Selene, what you got for this one?
So, I mean, mine's a little bit of a surprising one, but I'm actually going with the San Antonio Spurs for like my little tanking team. Now, I know as blasphemous as it might be to say that about a Greg Popovich-led team, but I mean, you look at their offseason, I did like their draft pick of Devin Vassell, but I mean, what else did they do? They re-signed Jakob Poeltl, and they gave Drew Eubanks like a decent, like cheap deal. Also drafted Trey Jones out of Duke. Like the next biggest move that they made was signing Keita Bates-Diop. Like I don't think that they're really going for it. They're just kind of like content to run it back without their best 3-point shooter from last year and Bryn Forbes, who they let go to Milwaukee on a dirt cheap 2-year, $4 million deal. Like I think that they're really trying to just tank it up, maybe get someone that Popovich can actually use for like his last couple of years. So I think that low key, I think that that's what they're going for. I also do not expect what's his name, DeMar DeRozan, to be on that team for the whole season. Orlando, you're on, like, make an offer, man. Come on.
He just got ranked 86th best player in the NBA. That's wild to me. That's disrespectful.
Those rankings are terrible.
Yeah, they're pretty bad every year.
Where was Luka? Number 1? Number 2?
I don't know.
Not number.
Have they shown that far up yet, or was it just 50 through 100?
I think it was just 50 to 100, and there was a lot of eyebrow.
Spoiler: my man is going to be number 1.
All right, Marcellus.
All right, well, I've got Oklahoma City. I'm doubling down on them because I just feel like that's why they're getting all these draft picks. They're like, we're just going to trade all of our best players away. We know we're going to suck. We're going to let Shai Gill score as many points as he can. Hopefully he can get some film so that, therefore, if we need to ship him, we can. And he looks like a greater player than he is, almost a la this whole Brad Beal season. I feel like they're just pretty much mortgaging everything they have for these draft picks. They know that there's a lot of talent in next year's draft, and I believe the year after that too. So they're just going to try to see what they can kind of build from there. Sam Presti's had so much success in the draft that I feel like they'll allow the Thunder to suck for a couple of years.
And if you're on that roster at all, you better not buy a home in OKC, because really anyone is open and being shipped out on that roster.
Right.
All right. So the last question that we got, a GM that either didn't do enough or made you question their plan. Mine maybe against the grain, but the Los Angeles Clippers, this is a team that I haven't really liked the way that their roster was constructed. There was a lot of murmurs in the offseason about, chemistry and issues like that, and Kawhi being unhappy. You could see in some games, like there was one game where he passed the ball and he was hoping his teammate made a basket cut and they didn't, and he was just like he showed emotion for once in his entire life, which was interesting. But his big free agent pickup was Serge Ibaka, who is solid and is a big culture piece. But if that's your biggest offseason acquisition in the summer, you're bringing that back to your star. They also brought in Nicholas Batum, who was washed like 2.5 years ago. Kai Bowman. Luke Kennard was a decent pickup, but they swung in the draft. I think on both of their picks with Daniel Oturu out of Minnesota and Jay Scrubb, the JUCO kid, and I also brought in Rajon Tucker. Just bringing in other athletes that are going to take some time and take some seasoning doesn't seem like a recipe to appeasing the star that you have. And the guys that you brought in aren't guys that can take a shot with the game on the line, which is something that you need because you have Paul George as your secondary shot maker much. And that's
Oof.
Yeah, that's a rough situation to be going into, especially when you look at what the Lakers did in their offseason. Like the best that you got for Kawhi was Kai Bowman and Batum and Serge Ibaka and Luke Kennard. I don't know. I don't get it. I thought that they could have done a lot more, and didn't make sense to me. Jordan, what you got?
I'm looking at the Denver Nuggets. I had them backtracking to, I think it was 6th in my projected standings for next season. They made this miraculous run to the Western Conference Finals this year, winning just both series, coming back from 3-1 down, beating the Jazz. And they were favored over the Jazz, but the Clippers, they were heavy underdogs in that series. And I mean, they gave a good bit of fight to the Lakers, as much as could be expected at that point. So I just kind of feel like they're destined for what happened to the Blazers a year or two ago when they made the Western Conference Finals and then they just kind of tailed off the next year. I don't really see that Denver made moves to capitalize on that momentum. Rumors are they offered Jeremy Grant the same 3 for $60 deal that he bolted for the Pistons for. But to me, if he's that big of a part of what you do and what your roster makeup is, because you've got, so many other subpar defensive pieces on that roster, you really need Jeremy Grant. And to let him go to the Detroit Pistons of all teams, throw him a little bit of extra money. I mean, what's the difference between, 20 and 22 or 20 and 24 million a year or whatever, add a 4th year on there, to get him to stay or something. And I mean, I do like JaMychal Green in terms of who they got to replace, but they lost Grant and Mason Plumlee as well, who I think is a very underrated player there. Is he was able to come in, when Jokic would get in foul trouble, and he would step up, play solid minutes defensively, and just kind of give them, a little bit of just strength and toughness that they sometimes, wouldn't always get from Jokic, who is, just more worried about putting up those, triple doubles and throwing crazy passes all over the court. Nothing against that, but sometimes you just need an enforcer, and you need some guys who kind of want to get dirty and play tough. And Plumlee made those plays. Jeremy Grant was the glue for this team. And, we've heard the Nuggets rumored for, how long about, they're going to get Brad Beal to be a 3rd star. They're in the Drew Holiday sweepstakes. They're almost like the Celtics of the West minus the draft picks. They have all this young talent. Well, eventually this young talent has to come together. I mean, I am fairly high on Michael Porter Jr. and Bol Bol, though I don't think as high as some of you guys are from the sounds of it. But if these guys don't hit, then their momentum is just gone, and they're definitely taking a step back this year, because there are, a number of other teams in the West that made clear steps forward. So I just think the Nuggets had to make a deal of some sort. And I think, they kind of were able to showcase Michael Porter a bit, and it's tough to give up on a piece like that. But if you were able to put him in a deal to, to get someone like Drew Holiday, to play alongside Murray. It sounds like Beal was probably off the table, but there were guys out there that it seems like, if the rumors are true and they'd been linked to them, why couldn't they make that deal happen? So just kind of think they treaded water this offseason and not being able to retain their own guys. I think that's a bit of an issue, although I'm going to give them kudos. This news, I think, just broke last night. Monty Morris, they signed for a 3-year, $27 million deal. I know Marcellus was high on him back in our playoff preview, and I've always been a big fan on incredible assist to turnover ratio guy, just a great guy to have running your second unit at the point. So I was a fan of them, getting Monty Morris back in the fold, but curious to see what happens with them because, they're a team that has thrived at home. So you wonder kind of if they're not playing many games in front of fans this season, if they lose some of that home court advantage and kind of how they do, when the deck is stacked against them a bit, because they've been, playing from a higher seed line with the 3 seed here. I think the last 2 years, I think they had the 3 seed. So I do project them in the bottom half of the playoff standings this year.
So Lenny, what you got?
Man, we're going back to the well. For who's messing up? The Kings, baby. I mean, you already touched on a little bit. I mean, the fact that they got Tyrese Halliburton, who slipped to them in the draft, does not forgive the other dumb stuff that they got going on around there. I mean, we already mentioned the Bogdanovich situation where, he was a restricted free agent and the Hawks, he signed the deal with the Hawks. Like, you're telling me that you can't either match that deal and just trade him in like a month or something for something, or just say, hey, Hawks, we're going to match the deal. But if you give us a 2nd round pick, he's yours. Like, even just something. Like, you could have got something. You could have got their fax machine. Like, get something for the guy, man. Like, come on.
They tried with the Bucks.
Have them pay for the soda in your vending machine. Like, get them to do something for your guy. But alas, the Kings, baby, they ain't doing it. And then you throw in the fact that they throw out some money for Frank the Tank, and oh yeah, they got Hassan Whiteside back in town. Like, the guy, even though they already had Rashawn Holmes, who plays actually quietly pretty well, and Marvin Bagley, who is a 4/5. Yeah, let's just throw a couple of fives up there to clog up our front court, because why not? And oh yeah, Buddy Hield still isn't returning anybody's calls. Kings, man, what are we doing?
Dysfunction everywhere. Marcellus, close us out.
I got Houston. I feel like everything that we've seen them do with the trade, trading John Wall for Russell Westbrook, I mean, they got the worst player, so they lost the trade, in my opinion. I don't really think John Wall is anybody that's going to really change anything about your franchise. He's going to come in there. He's going to be a good player, but wherever you were, you're probably going to stay there. I mean, I feel like them getting DeMarcus Cousins, I mean, he hasn't played in 2 seasons almost. I don't think that he's going to be the guy that they really want him to be and need him to be. They lost Robert Covington, who I think was actually somebody that was a real player as far as, he was going to play hard every night. Their best defensive player, I don't care what anybody says about PJ Tucker. And he was their 3-and-D guy. So I feel like they could have really used him this upcoming season. So now they've got James Harden holding out. They got this coach, who's unproven. He's, this is his first time ever coaching. He's got John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, James Harden on the roster. I mean, I just don't really like what they did with their offseason. So I still think that they're in that, kind of 6 to 10 range, because talent is talent. The cream typically does rise to the crop, but at the same time, I think that they had a chance to get a lot better and they got a lot worse.
Yeah, they really missed that window with, the CP3 Rockets, it appears, as far as championships go. So, all right, guys, appreciate the time. Looking forward to our next conversation, where we're going to talk about, kind of have our award show and talk about some of our predictions for, player of the year, coach of the year, and stuff like that. So stay tuned. Appreciate the time, guys. You have a good night.
Bet.